Guys, I'm saying that it's episode 4 out of episode 6, and I believe that's happening. But after watching the episode of Loki this week, kind of feels like it's the finale. I don't know how to approach this, so I, I need to talk, as I'm sure any of you who've been following it diligently, as us do after that episode, because a lot happened, and we do need to discuss it. When I discuss it, there's only one man when it comes to Marvel that I will call up. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to bring him in. As always, it is the one, the only. Dan Lynham, you're very welcome back to page 180 to discuss Loki. But before we get on to that, Dan, I want to ask you one question. With the week that's in it, it's obviously Halloween. You're a Marvel guy. If you could dress up as any character this Halloween in the Marvel universe, and by that I mean all of it, I don't just mean the MCU, TV shows, comic books, whatever way you want to take it, who would it be and why? I don't know. Maybe it might be Drow. I don't know. But who would you pick if you could pick anyone from Marvel?
Well, I mean, last Halloween I actually did do a superhero, anti-hero, whatever you want, outfit where I actually in work I dressed up as the Crow, and it was quite a movie accurate outfit, so they're very happy with that. So dressing up as superheroes is very much in my wheelhouse. Um, if it was to come down to something like that, I'd say one of the ones I consider would be the Scarlet Spider, who's we've discussed one of my favorite characters. But when you really introduce that blood red spandex into things, I don't want to get cancelled, so I'm not going to do that. But maybe I would go for. I have an unlimited budget. Another one I'd love to do is maybe the Iron Spider, or from the Sinister Six, maybe the semi-cyborg Spider-Man. I've always wanted to do a Spider-Man dress up.
Ooh.
In the Sinister Six story back from the early 90s by Todd McFarlane, where he's the artist. Spider-Man gets badly injured, so Deathlock puts him into this like semi-battle suit, semi-injury kind of resistant healing suit, and it's an awesome design. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check it out. But that would make a fantastic Halloween costume, so I'm going to go for the Sinister Six cyborg Spider-Man.
Very cool. I'm also going to pick a Spider-Man. Look, the time that's in it, it's literally every moment of my free time is spent playing for Spider-Man 2 right now. But I'm going to pick one which is going to sound a bit problematic at the start, but trust me, it's fine. I would dress as Miles Morales. And I know what you're thinking straight away. No, you can't do that. No. Relax. He's got the mask. It's fine. Okay. It'd be Max or Miles in costume. And I'm going to specifically say that I'm going to dress as the Bodega Spider-Man from Miles Morales' game. Because first off, Miles is deadly. He's my guy. And even like when you have a choice in Spider-Man 2 of playing between the two, I'm constantly going to Miles. He can turn invisible. He's got electric venom power. He's awesome. But the Bodega Spider-Man costume rules for one reason and one reason only. You have got a backpack with a badass Spider-Man hero cat chilling in the backpack. So, and that's awesome. You just get to walk around with a cool cat who helps you win the fight. You have your finisher, and the cat comes in and scratches the bad guy's face at the end. It's deadly. So yeah, Bodega Spider-Man, because you get a twofer and you get like a little cat pal with you as well. But look, we could discuss Spider-Man all day, and I'm sure there will come time for that. But we're here to discuss Loki today instead. Yep. What we're going to look at is obviously Loki episode 4, and as we begin, as we always do, we're going to start with a spoiler warning. This segment, guys, is called Into the Spoilerverse. The clue is in the name. If you don't want to know what happened in this episode, go away, watch it, and come back. We're also going to refer to everything that's happened in the MCU to date. We're also going to touch on potentially comics and similar storylines that have happened there. As always, if we do bring in external sources, it is to enhance, not spoil those sources for you, to give you a bit of context for the storyline to help you out there. So that is what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. So before we get started, guys, as always, we're going to recap where we were and what brought us to this moment before we discuss the episode with our alternate recap, as we always do. And we begin this week's episode of Loki, season 2, episode 4, at the end of time, where Miss Minutes shows Renslayer a flashback. The Kang had butterfly affected her out of her brain, so that she commanded his armies in the multiversal war. Miss Minutes and Renslayer agree they don't need him, and they go full girl power like the Spice Girls. If one of the Spice Girls was a clock, which again we don't know if they were or not. Again, we've never kind of explored that avenue. Loki, Mobius, and Sylvie take a fascinated Victor Timely to meet OB obvious. They immediately fanboy over each other and share autographs. OB explains the issue and Timely understands. Thank God, because I sure as fuck don't. I'm just like, you know what you're talking about, OB, that's fine. Meanwhile, in jail, B15 and Brad both make opposing pitches to Docs and her rogue troops, who are on the fence until Renslayer and Miss Minute show up, and they lean no, so Ravonna fires up the old genocide Dyson and murders them all. Sylvie gets pissed at Mobius for wanting some pie and then ends up actually in Pie Land, like she's stuck in a Alanis Morissette. It's like, pie. Her and Loki debate whether it's better to burn down the TVA or try to fix it and play God. Loki says they are gods and Mike drops away from the conversation. Just as Timely and OB have figured out whatever it is they were trying to figure out, Timely gets obsessed with Mobius's hot cocoa and goes off to get himself some, but gets kidnapped by Brad and taken to Renslayer and Miss Minutes, who has now hijacked the system. The TVA starts to shut down as Loki prunes himself from episode 1 and promises Sylvie and us that it'll all make sense in the end. And I'll tell you what, Loki, it fucking better. This enables them to use magic, so they manage to enchant Brad to prune Renslayer and rescue Timely, while OB is able to reboot Miss Minutes. They open the blast door, and Timely volunteers to do the hoofing because he knows how it works. So basically their plan is young Hitler is telling them to just trust him to save the world. It seems like a solid plan, and it works out about as well as you imagine that plan would, as he gets spaghettified, and we end the episode as the temporal loom goes, well, you know what, this isn't me. Dan, what does the temporal loom do?
The temporal loom went boom.
You're goddamn right it did. And that was Loki episode 4 of season 2. There you go. So, Dan, I want to discuss this, okay? And we are obviously going to talk about like what we thought about the episode, and I do want to get your thoughts here, but a bit of context with this. Before the show started, the media got sent out screeners of the show, as is common for Disney Plus properties. They were sent specifically for screeners, which we totally understand why now that was the case. The interesting thing was, though, the early inclinations of Loki was that a lot of people said it wasn't great. We obviously loved the first 2 episodes. We found a lot to like, if it was a slight step down for the third. So I was kind of thinking, and it did have me worried after the third, oh shit, is this about to go off a cliff now based off what they said? But now that we've seen what the media saw, so the entire world is up to date on Loki, no one has spoilers. How are you feeling now about both this episode and the season as a whole?
I mean, this episode, I mean, being honest, it wasn't great, was it?
Okay. Yeah, I'm like, okay.
That was a full, like, 48 minutes of TV where I'm being very literal in this statement. I was on the edge of my seat. My partner Kelly said after a certain scene, which you mentioned in the flashback that we'll discuss in a bit, that she realized she hadn't taken a breath for 30 seconds after it. I did think at the very start of this episode that we were, like you just said, kind of trekking down into a lull. Like probably building up to like whatever we're going to get in the penultimate episode next week and then the finale after that. But then suddenly it really just kind of started to correct itself and things just got very exciting. The stakes revealed themselves a lot more than maybe they have in the last few weeks. I mean, last week was the Back to the Future 3 episode is what it felt like to me. You know, it was very much that like kind of classic time traveling sort of episode or movie that we're used to in different franchises, especially things around the 70s, 80s and stuff like that. But this was just such an exciting episode, and we always talk a lot about action on this show. I loved how they could get so much peril and so much excitement across without just relying on your typical fight scenes or chases or anything like that. It was just a white knuckle episode that just delivered.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't see what the media was going on about. Like, this for me was an absolute return to form. It was phenomenal and proof of what we've been saying all along, that when this is a TVA based workplace action comedy, this show just works. Every time we're in the TVA this season, it has knocked it out of the park. And the only time it stepped down was when we kind of spent a bit of time away. Is that a little bit concerning now that it appears the TVA may be gonzo and the show kind of has to reinvent itself in the last 2 episodes? Sure, yeah, it'd be fair if you kind of had that anxiety where you're like, I really like this formula, and now the formula just literally blew up in our faces. And we don't know. We've no idea kind of what's coming up next. But also, we can't judge what we haven't seen. I don't understand what they were talking about. If I'm being honest, this is fantastic. And like even last week's episode, which we're calling a lull, that would be an absolute highlight for most, if not all, Marvel TV shows, aside from this, because this is just a step above kind of what we're the average of what we're used to seeing, with, you know, the occasional the occasional kind of exception, which is phenomenal. I think for me, this is more confirmation that the common default with Marvel today is to just say that everything is meh and just say everything's a bit shit. And that's just a narrative that has crept in and people are just ready to write their reviews beforehand. And you know what? I that's there for a reason. It's because a lot of the stuff we have seen and we've discussed on this show has been kind of mediocre and disappointing. But for right now, do you know what? We're in the middle of something that's working. Can't we not just fucking enjoy it? This was excellent. It was edgier stuff. See, it leaves us with that kind of, I haven't had that sense of wonder since walking away initially. Now, again, this was way bigger, but I haven't had the sense of wonder that I had at this end of the episode. And we will discuss theories and everything we think there. Since I initially walked away at the end of Infinity War, like, what the fuck happens next? Like, I don't know what it means. I'm like, is that the TVA's exploded, but our characters aren't dead? There's 2 episodes of the season left. Is that the entire world has exploded? Is Marvel rebooting now? Is that what they're telling us? But we have the Marvels coming up, and it's just got my brain on fire. Now, again, with Infinity War, we thought about it a while, and we're like, no, they're coming back in the next movie. It's fine. And we kind of figured it out, but it was still really effective. But here, I just don't know what's going on, and that is brilliant. You know, could it go wrong? Yes, absolutely. And some of the big swings Marvel take, that's why people are skeptical, and I get it, and I share that to a point. But right now, this is a great episode. We're in the middle of a great season of TV. Let's just fucking take a minute, take a beat, and like enjoy these episodes. And let's like, I think what's most reassuring for me is that I now trust these creators implicitly. You know, whatever comes next, I'm like, you know what, you've got it. Like, take your swing. I'm not going to turn around and say whatever you do is going to be great. If it's shit next week, it's shit next week, and you fucked it at the goal line. But right now, shoot your shot. I'm in. You've got me. And I'm a big fan. I do have one little gripe that I wanted to discuss here, and I didn't harbor anything, and we got a lot of positives out of it. But I didn't really understand. And again, maybe you'll be able to make this clearer for me. I didn't really understand a lot of Loki and Sylvie's story in particular. Okay. I didn't understand why she was there. I like, as soon as she showed up at the start of the episode, I'm like, why is she following them back? Like, that didn't happen last week for a start. Now, of course she can. She could just get the tempad and fire it up and then be right behind them. But like, I didn't feel like that's what she was doing. Why is she now totally on side for this plan? And then also you had the throwback to episode 1, which like, I think they meant it to feel like, holy shit, like, fuck, it's happening. Oh, it all came together. But I'm like, no, I still don't understand it. Like, why did Loki need to prune himself? Was it just a paradox? And he's like, oh, I proved myself in the past. I needed to go back. So now I need to do this. And I'm like, okay, but like, that's kind of the shittest eventuality. You know what I mean? And again, now, having said that, I loved their debate. I loved their predetermined, or, you know, do we play gods? We are gods. I loved that debate that they had in the pie room. I really liked Sylvie chewing Mobius out for wanting to go get pie, like, at the most serious time, because it was just so on brand for Mobius. And finally, someone called him on it. But so there were elements that I liked, but I just didn't kind of understand the motivations, particularly around Sylvie, and that's been a recurrent theme. Was that something that sat well with you? Am I missing something? What are your own kind of thoughts?
I don't think you're missing anything. I think what you said, a lot of people would agree with you. Regarding the Loki pruning thing, as far as I remember, and I haven't done a second watch through yet or anything like that, I remember Obi saying to Loki that once he time skips again, he had to prune himself,
Yeah,
to basically reset himself in the loom so they could like pull him out with the harpoon apparatus. So I think that was just he was obviously captivated seeing Sylvie for the first time in the lift because of the continuity of the storyline.
yeah.
But this future Loki, our Loki, the Loki from the last episode, knew that it was just he had to be pruned. He remembered he was pruned. So that itself just makes a bit of sense for me. He remembers the original plan. His past self was too captivated, so he knew someone pruned him because he had lived that already, and it just turned out to be himself. That was probably the only gripe I really had with the episode, because I thought there'd be something bigger or something grander attached to that.
Yeah,
It turned out to be quite clever the way it was done, so I didn't mind it. But regarding the Sylvie stuff, which you said we've discussed a lot, I do feel that Sylvie has become one of these characters that they had a purpose for at the start in season one. And now that they're in season two, it's just, have they written themselves into a corner? Have they created a character that the fans really, really like, but just doesn't have a place in this season? Would it be better for this episode if maybe at the end of last week's episode, episode 3, that maybe she was like, sucked into another timeline, and while their little gadgets that send them around the place were down because of its minutes, would it make more sense for her to maybe have been trying to get back to them so she could be there just as the temporal loom ended, and have her on her own little side adventure, maybe through different branches? Because yeah, I just really feel with this, they have a character on their hands that needs to be present, but it feels as simple as they just didn't really know how to write her,
yeah.
which is something that always happens, especially with sidekicks in comic books, that they're just there and they have to be mentioned from time to time. So I would say, even though it's not a plot line, it's more of a mechanic. I would say that's what we're dealing with.
I'm just going to throw this out there based off kind of what you're saying, because I totally agree with your assessment. Very astute as always. But do you think if that's the case, if she's someone that may not be plot necessary, she could be in line for a potential shocking death? I'm saying it, and I don't know if I believe it myself, but what do you think?
Very possible. I mean, that's the easiest option. But the other thing as well is, if they were going down the road of the Lady Loki character, which character-wise they really are, there's going to be a lot for her to do afterwards. Because I believe at the end of the saga, the multiverse is going to be left open. It's just going to have more rules in place, so travel won't be as easy, or it won't be like a Deus Ex Machina in, like, whatever saga they're doing after this, whether it be the Age of Apocalypse properly, not like that crap Sony produced, or whatever other story they decide to go down. So all the heroes are in jeopardy in the big movie, and then suddenly they come in for another universe and save the day. I do think that at the end of Secret Wars, we're going to have new rules in the Marvel universe. So in that regard, I do think that Lady Loki / Sylvie will, have power. She could be the ruler of one of the alternate Asgards. She could maybe look for other variants and create her of the Asgardians, or of maybe like mythological characters, which obviously we saw explored in Love and Thunder. Maybe she could establish. There's loads they could do with her. Killing her off is the easy option, but no, I don't think that will be the right thing. I think you maybe have a character there like your emergency rocket pack, where you can use Sylvie in the future in other movies, and I think that's where she'd excel. She should end her story. If I think this is where it's going, where it is, she should have her own timeline where she can be herself. Not necessarily when we saw her in the McDonald's one, but maybe something that's going to serve her ego the way we know Loki needs his ego served. Because we do have to remind ourselves from time to time, Sylvie is Sylvie, but Sylvie is also
Loki.
at her core Loki.
Yeah. No, good to say. And I agree. I agree. I don't think, but it exists there as a possibility. Could be some tension, could be a good fake out, so there's interesting potential there. Someone we spoke about as also maybe not being essential is the one and only Jonathan Majors. And interesting news this week that Disney, on kind of Majors watch, which has obviously been a kind of something that is unavoidable in the discourse of this season. This week, Disney pulled a highly touted film of his that had done quite well in Sundance off the back of allegations. So again, there's a move on Disney's part now that suggests they are planning for life after Jonathan Majors. Last week, we spoke about the introduction of Victor Timely, and we said, you know what, like it was fun, it was fine, but also it was, I think we both kind of took away, if they got rid of Jonathan Majors, actually I wouldn't be that upset, whereas I previously maybe would have been. We got a bit more Victor Timely here, and they let him do a lot more character work. He wasn't just a utility like he was to get us through the plot last season. They let him kind of cook a little bit here. Of course, at the end, RIP, he was spaghettified. But do you still feel the same now after seeing him this week when they let him kind of work a bit more?
Yeah, in essence, I do because as good as he was in this one, we have discussed obviously his tendency to, I don't know if overact's the right word, but it's like
Yeah.
pantomime. It feels like to him, it's really hokey. It's a bit camp, which I think works in smaller doses. He was a bit insufferable in Quantum Mania, the more I think about it. But I did like his portrayal of Victor Timely. I like knowing how powerful this character is going to be from what the glimpses we've seen in movies, the way they've sold this character, and then what we know happens in the comics. um that this really all powerful, terrifying character can start off as this stammering, introverted, terrified, cowardly man.
Yeah.
So his portrayal of Victor Timely has been fine, but that's one of the things that's interesting. Like, we've got Renslayer here, and the fan rumor is that she is a variant. She is the Sylvie to Kang that Sylvie is to Loki, if I even said that properly.
Mm.
So could the actor's name completely escaped me. Uh it's I can't remember her name. I know it's a traditional African name. It's hard to pronounce. But like, could Renslayer find herself as the, I don't know, John Cena of this, right place at right time? Could we
Mm.
see Renslayer becoming Kang going forward, knowing that she's a variant, and like, that's a big reach.
Yeah.
But they have this character here that essentially it could be Kang if the fan theories are correct, and then going forward you can have this new face on an established character, which is something we've already discussed. Um, Possibly, I don't know. I mean,
Mm.
the whole like Jonathan Majors thing is just it's so messy, and I
It's a
think I
real life equivalent of like the end of this episode. It's I don't know what the fuck's gonna happen. You know what I mean? Like it's like I don't know what the fuck it is, but it's actual real life stakes. And there's obviously a serious case at the core of it. And again, like kind of we don't want to play this for sport, but it is obviously something that we need to discuss.
yeah,
I agree kind of with the sentiment of what you're saying. I feel I don't know if it turned me around. I really liked him here, I have to say. I thought this was a great performance. I got some good laughs, particularly around him and OB. Now, again, more of the laughs are with OB, if I'm being honest. Like, where it's like a snake eating its own tail. Amazing. Like, his line delivery. Ki Kwan is just an absolute superstar. Everything. I want him in every show that I watch now. Also, again, OB's little praise when he was little grin when he was praised around Victor, and he was just like a little squee grin to himself. But I did like the two of them together. I liked even when Timely was kind of cornered by Renslayer and Miss Minutes, he's like, thank God you're both okay. I loved it. Like
yeah,
it was well performed. It was, more of a kind of a testament to the ability that Majors brings to the role. So I did feel like more that it would be a loss to the series, while not being fully convinced that Marvel is fucked if they have to let Jonathan Majors go in the same way they would have been if they had to drop the whole Thanos storyline. But I do feel like his death, if it is a real death, and that's something I do want to discuss, when he got spaghettified, is a loss for the rest of this series because, like you said, it feels like potential left on the table. This was Kang's succession plan. So there was a lot of potential in the story of this essentially nice guy becoming Hitler, you know what I mean? Like becoming the most evil person that's ever lived. And now if the spaghettification is not undone next week, however they plan to do whatever they do next week, then like yeah, it's just left on the table. It's wasted potential. But I do feel like this week then set up Renslayer and Miss Minutes and kind of solidified them as the big bads of the series now after Timely's demise. Obviously, look, pruning and being pruned and being rebooted. Obviously, look, they're not in positions of strength now, but it seems more, I think, unfortunate pun, but solid than spaghettification is like a way of kind of coming back into the story, than them being turned into kind of literal spaghetti. But the question I have with that kind of, and I've seen the fan theories as well, and I do find them interesting, and it could be the way it goes. Although the series was written before everything came out with Majors and recorded, so they can't do it here, but they could potentially in the future. The question I have about that though is this is the second week in a row we've seen them. Obviously, last week they were at odds and kind of undoing each other, kind of untying each other's shoelaces as the episode went on. This week they were more unified front, but both weeks they've lost. And that's not a great way. Like, we come to the world of wrestling where it's like, if you want your big bad guy, he needs to beat other people and become a real threat. And they're not threats as it is. If you lose 2 weeks in a row and your master plans are undone, though Renslayer stepping forward, us learning that she was the commander of Kang's army, you know, that's a credibility boost. But then again, she was defeated kind of relatively straightforward as soon as Loki and Sylvie's powers were switched back on. It was like, bye bye Renslayer, bye bye Miss Mints. Do you think they did enough here, if they are to be the big bads for the rest of the season, and if this season is to continue on beyond it, though we obviously don't know what the plan is? Do you think that they're kind of, or do you think this is just one loss too much and that might be the end for them? Or what are your thoughts on where Renslayer and Miss Minutes are left here?
So I still think that, like, I mean, my prediction last week was that Renslayer was going to become the big bad of this season, and even though a lot of people were saying that's not the case, it seems to be going that way. And I'm also just calling it out there. No one else said it. I did it happen earlier than I thought, but Victor Timely, my prediction was he was going to make some sacrifice, and that was going to be the end of him. Said it last week. I'm really glad I did, because here we are. I think the spaghettification has undone him. But it does. I think, like, that's really the last we're going to see of him in this, like, timeline. I think it'll be the last we see of him in general. But they still have a bit of wiggle room. But we'll discuss it in a bit. But I think what they've done with what they're going to do with the timeline thing, with the loom, with the explosion, there's a lot of possibilities that have opened. But going back to Renslayer and Miss Minutes, yeah, like I predicted that I really do feel that she is going to be the villain of this, and it may be, like I said, right place at right time. It could put her in a position for her to go on, because this feels like a crux, the whole season 2 of Loki. And after we're done with this, it's going to be different. And I'm going to throw something out there that no one else has discussed so far. This one it's not as reaching as I normally go, but it's an interesting theory that no one has discussed. So if we look at the timeline of Loki, now they say in the TVA time doesn't work the same, but they've been lied to constantly. So let's just take the amount of time from the very start of Loki to where we are right now. I mean, we're probably looking at about a week's worth of adventures. It's been quite a short amount of time, because the Marvel Cinematic Universe has created their own time travel rules, which we've seen in Endgame. So let's just say the TVA have been lied to, or the truth's been kept for them, and we have a week here. So in the alternate timeline that was created during Endgame, when Loki took the Power Stone and traveled, became a variant because he interfered with the timeline. If we were to, like, line his character, because it's not the sacred timeline's Loki, it's like an alternate.
Yeah.
We're only a few weeks removed from the events of the first Avengers movie. So is this going to play in somehow? You know, it's a strange one, but as far as we've seen now, that the sacred timeline is exploding, the branches are splitting, so it leaves up on a lot of, like, play around for different timelines. So we didn't at any stage see during the Avengers movies or the Marvel movies that preceded the Avengers, any sort of, like, hiccup in the timeline. So we have a lot of options available to us. So if we really think about where this exists in the timeline of the Marvel universe as a whole, it's 5 years in the past almost. So we have to kind of think about what that could be now. The only reason why they may not explore that is because timeline element might get very confusing.
Yeah.
But Marvel in the comics have done this before. There was a lot of time travel in the late 80s and early 90s. It did get very convoluted, but it allowed them to kind of reach into their bag of tricks from here and there and create what we now know as the branching timelines. So I think we there could be some interesting stuff coming, and I do think that in this saga, the end of this episode is going to become one of the most important instances in the entire thing. I think this is where everything's going to change. And in that reason as well, yeah, we know the Marvel's coming, and after that, we don't really have a great idea of everything that's coming. So we have to think about where the Marvels exists. Does it take up minutes after the end of Miss Marvel? We have to see where that goes. But yeah, I think I think the spaghettification could allow them to maybe get rid of John Majors, maybe because of the way Victor Timely his story is ended. Maybe because spaghettification might have interfered with the Loom, it could have removed that version of Kang from all timelines. Okay, that's crazy. That might be an out that Disney can use. And with Renslayer, maybe whatever's going to happen next episode, maybe she could find herself powering up, because they really went for the Sopranos, Neon Genesis Evangelion ending, where okay, in the Sopranos it went black at the last episode, and you're like asking yourself what happened. And in the 90s anime Neon Genesis, there were these scenes where for a full minute nothing happened, and your mind begins to wander, and these concepts flood your brain, and obviously that's the story mechanic you're using. So Ravonna has an opportunity now to take the reins. So I'm just interested to see where it's going. Okay. This is the theory crafting, like the Loom, has exploded.
Yeah.
Many branches in which to explore now, and I love that.
It's literally like, yeah, it's pick your own, because the world has essentially blown up. We don't know what's going to happen, and and as well, I have to say, I love it. It's very brave. It reminds me of Game of Thrones, often Joffrey in like episode 3 or 4 of one season, and it's like he's your main villain. How do you kill him? What the hell? But it just like having that kind of. And it's funny because the 4th episode of season 1 was called the Nexus event, but this is a Nexus event essentially happening here. For all of the MCU, it's amazing. And again, I really hope they don't retcon it. But we'll save our kind of main theory crafting for the end. I do want to discuss the cliffhanger now, and in particular, I want to shout out. I loved. This show is just so aware. Like last week, they had the opening Marvel credits where it was the old-timey piano, so we're instantly in the setting that our characters were going to be. And the end was just they knew the end date because they had a Halloween style end credits, like the very horror vibe. It felt almost like the minimalist American Horror Story theme song. Playing over like the usual shots of the TVA that we've become accustomed to. And now we also know it also reminded me of geez, I'm giving it a lot of credit here, but it reminded me of The Wire as well. The Wire, at the start of every season, you get this kind of jumbled, like kind of, it'd be good, but you wouldn't have a clue what the various shots in the opening credits were. And then by the end of the season, the jigsaw would have become clear, and you're like, oh, that's from that, and that's from that, and that's from that. It's like a puzzle, and like which the episode of The Wire was. And that's what the closing credits of Loki have been, where it's like, I don't understand why there's a little toy man. Well, now we understand why there is, because it was in the episode, and it was like, that looks like Loki, that looks like Mobius. It doesn't look like anybody. But like again, but like playing that with the kind of horror vibe where on Halloween week, absolute genius. On the face of it, if we had to take the ending at face value, which of course, because there's 2 episodes left, we cannot. But let's just say we can. The only person that we're kind of sure is most likely to be alive is Renslayer, because she got pruned, so she could be off just chilling with Goliath back at the end of time again. The rest, again, assumed exploded. We literally saw a nuclear blast go off in Loki's face, albeit he is a god now, so in theory, and he's got his magic powers back, so in theory he could survive. But of course we know, like, it's likely not the case. They didn't kill off all of the characters in this and then they're just starting fresh. Like, we won't wake up where it's like just a plain white background and there's a baby Loki and it's just starting again. We know some people are going to come back. We know we got a lot of deaths though in this episode. Whose deaths are you taking seriously? What deaths can we actually respect in this episode? And who do we think is definitely nailed on for a comeback?
So I think most of the deaths seem pretty much solid here. Like Docs and her guys, that was brilliant. And I was kind of saying to my partner Kelly, she was like, why don't they show anything? And it was like a really like the Reservoir Dogs thing. Yes. You don't see it, you hear it, and you know your brain fills in the blanks. And I was like, they could have at least shown, especially when B-15 goes back in and sees what's happening, and you can hear like the drips and stuff like that. That like I figured that they will give us a bit of, like visceral kind of visual, but obviously then they were saving that because they have to consider ratings and viewability. That the Victor Timely thing, which is obviously the next big death, was so graphic. Hey, there was no blood in it and stuff like that, but you saw being stripped down to an atomic level, which was just so shocking. And I love when you can get a death scene in any form medium that has weight, that comes out of nowhere but makes sense, doesn't feel cheap. And I did predict like Victor Timely had a very simple role to employ. And I feel like he's kind of like, I think people are going to expect Victor Timely to come back in some regard. I don't think he is. And it's not
I
because it
agree.
has got major stuff. I think that's it. But one thing about Kang from the comics is the terror that he instills in like the world's mightiest heroes is that he's endless. So we've lost Victor Timely, we've lost the Ant-Man, Kang, we've lost He Who Remains, and then in all the different variants of all different timelines and different multiverses, because obviously once again branch timelines in the multiverse are not the same thing. Like what happens if he, like, once again, he just doesn't stop coming every time you defeat this incredibly powerful character. There's, Hydra obviously exists in Marvel Universe, but he is like Hydra in a more mythological sense,
Yeah.
where he just like, you cut off one head and two spring back, and that is the terror of Kang. So we keep seeing these variants drop off, but this endless army keeps coming that maybe escalates in power. That's probably what they're trying to achieve here. So Victor Timely's done. I think he served his purpose. His death was incredibly impactful. Genuinely, really, I enjoy the plunge he took there, because my biggest gripe in any forms of media is companies not being able to pull the trigger, and it usually comes down to money to be made. We've discussed briefly before. One of my biggest favorite franchises of all time is the Warhammer 40,000 universe, which is essentially a tabletop game, but the story is probably the biggest scope of any story ever. If someone asks you to tell the Warhammer 40,000 lore, which is 40,000 years in our future, everyone always starts off, right, I'll summarize it. 65 million years ago, there was this war in heaven, and it goes on and on from there. It's incredibly like big and like, insane and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like what we're dealing with here. We have Marvel like pulled the trigger and killed Victor Timely, whereas in Warhammer 40,000 Universe, the point it was getting to is because of the tabletop game, they won't kill major characters because then they have to retire that model. They won't make the good guys win, the bad guys win, because that will affect someone's army, someone's models, and then playing the game with their friends suddenly becomes a thing.
Yeah.
So they have a lot of trouble pulling the trigger when it comes to killing characters, and Marvel don't. Once again, you made the perfect reference of Game of Thrones. What those guys did, especially BD Weiss and
Benioff.
Benioff. I should know. I've got a Game of Thrones like tattoo for out loud, but it's early, late night, guys. Apologies. But what they did was they showed us that the stakes of stories can't change, and that we are dealing with human characters, and anyone can die at any time. And I'm glad that that's changed the medium of what we expect in our TVs. Now we know going forward, anyone could die at any stage, and the stakes are real, and that improves the story. So I thought it was a very impactful scene. I thought the one that hit me, to answer your question most, was definitely Victor, because I didn't expect it. It made sense, and it established the threat of what the temporal loom has become. And then I after that happened, I didn't think the loom was going to go boom this episode. I thought that's maybe we would see it going unstable, and next week we'd maybe get a half episode of that. For it to like go supernova at the end, I loved it, because like it's the prediction I've been putting out there since the very start. But the implications now, it's rewritten the rules, and we have a lot of avenues to explore.
Yeah. And this is why we do this. Like, I love being led. I love being in the palm of a great storyteller telling me a story and just knocking me off balance when I don't expect it. That's why we talk about and we bring up the likes of the Game of Thrones and so on, because that's what they do so well and so effectively. And that's where we're at now. With, again, as you've spoken about, there's also great risk here, because as good as and effective as that and shocking as that was, in essence, they've also kind of, and again, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there's a path that they just see that I don't. And you know what? I trust them to find that path if it's there. But they've almost written themselves into a hole here now, because there's two ways that I can see them going about this, and maybe you can inform me on what your own theories are. And we can now. This is it. We can speak freely now. No, hold nothing back. But there's two options that I see here. One, we jump to another timeline and we get variants of these characters, or Loki can time jump to another timeline because we've seen him do that as well. And we get variants of these other characters. That seems really unsatisfying because we bought into these characters and their journeys and their motivations and, you know, their what's gone on and so on. So again, I wouldn't like that. But also them surviving this just seems really undoing of the impact of this episode. Like, we like this episode because they just killed the entire cast, and now we're just like, what the fuck is next?
Red wedding, yes.
Yeah, they literally red wedding here. It was the white wedding, you know what I mean? Because it was just like that nuclear blast. It's like that has killed every character here, and it's blown up the entire universe. So what's next? So I'm gonna ask you to solve that mystery for me, because I'm not waiting a week. Dan, tell me what's next. What do you think they're gonna do, or kind of do you know? And is that part of the joy? Like, where are you feeling? What can next week be? We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even that I have loads of theories. It's just I could see lots of possibilities, which are two different things. But I do have some things that really are going to be interesting, because the one thing about Loki, and I have to say it is a completely selfish thing, is that it's one of the episodes where we get very little kind of fan service. We've had a lot of references to a lot of time travel and stuff. Kevin Feige obviously loves Back to the Future, because this is not the first nor the last time we're going to hear it referenced, especially with OB's little Back to the Future tree model, which, you know, like, apologies, Marty, it's not the scale, and he's talking about the quality of it. I mean, it's the same arguments. But going forward, yes, I let's look at the rules of what Loki's established. So we have multiverses sitting on top of each other like an endless coil.
Yeah.
And they seem to be disconnected because of what He Who Remains did to keep the Kang variants separate and stop him from taking over the multiverse. Obviously, Thanos just trying to kill half of the universe. The stakes have multiplied. And in that regard, let's also say that, like, Thanos was the #1 murderer in the Marvel Universe, but it's actually Doc's now. She has killed quintillions of people.
Yeah.
Let's just, like, reflect on that. Let's not forget how much of a multi-billion, trillion, zillion murderer she is.
And she got a redemption arc in this episode, and she didn't really have to work for it that hard.
No, like, she is the #1 Marvel murderer. Like, it's and like, that's one thing where I feel they dropped the ball. The gravity of that was lost. Sylvie kept referring to it, but everyone else should have really had they should have explained the gravitas of that in a bit better. But anyway, so they're the rules. So with the multiverses sit on top of each other. They've remained separate in this because of what He Who Remains achieved at the end of the multiversal war. And the reason why he's pruning these timelines, I believe, is because when the timelines begin to intersect with other branches, they'll create the bridges between the multiverse. So what's happened now? The temporal loom has exploded. So these branches, I believe now, if we think of the TVA's monitor and how it shows sacred timeline, the branches coming from it, I think now we will essentially, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the 199999 universe, because it's not 616, that's the comics, ladies and gentlemen. I think we're going to have essentially loads of separate timelines running maybe in a spiral around each other, and I think that's what's going to, like, intersect the multiverse, which will create a chain reaction. It'll connect this coil. So we seen, I think it was a very obvious choice. We seen when it exploded, it looked like parts of the branches, which are becoming their own individual timelines now, seem to be traveling towards them. So I believe we're going to get a sort of multiverse of madness, Doctor Strange sort of thing, where we see multiple instances flashing by because of the rumors we've heard. Especially, we've referenced Deadpool a lot. I think they're going to tie into Loki really well. We seem to see a lot of alternate options with different characters and timelines. There's the big rumor going around that there's a scene that's been filmed for Deadpool in which we're going to see Jean Grey fighting the Scarlet Witch. Now, we were also told the Olsen twins were going to be in Multiverse of Madness as Wanda variants or different multiversal Wandas or whatever the rules established in that were. But this could be a rumor, this could be a red herring, but I do see now the chaos that is going to ensue. The TVA have been an agent of order, and now I think that now that order is broken down, we're going to see a lot of doors essentially open up. Because Marvel have done a very good job, including what they've done with Sony, at keeping a lot of the rules for multiversal travel, alternate timeline travel, or just the existence of these elements very, very much on board. One example that I saw someone mention, which I didn't pick up, which is very clever. If you look at the technology that Renslayer was using at the start of the episode, where she analyzed the what happened when He Who Remains was talking to her, it was the exact same graphics that they used in the last Spider-Verse movie, where Spider-Gwen was analyzing what had happened in. It's that orange, like holographic glow. So obviously that is a sort of retracing. It's the time element of the timeline exists in this unusual orange hue. So that's tied it very well together. Even though, like, that was more multiverse. And like I said, we have to remember the branching and the variants seem to exist in our universe, but the multiverses exist separately. It's opened itself up to tons of possibilities. And like I said, bringing back to the original point, we haven't seen a lot of the fan service in Loki. It's just been this individual story. But maybe going into next week, we could really get overloaded with this. We could see a lot of options. We could maybe see the Olsen twins as a Scarlet Witch, which you were promised and never got.
Imagine Ryan Reynolds. It just opened with Ryan Reynolds just like, oh, hi. And it's like, what the hell?
Exactly.
Like, it's possible. Like,
you never know. I mean, like, I'm just, as an X-Men fan, I'm incredibly excited to see what they do with the X-Men come across. And I've made some ridiculous theories in the past, half joking. But all I need, I don't want to see Wolverine's yellow mask. I don't want to see Patrick Stewart's bald head or one of these really obscure characters that very few people know. It just, as these timelines are possibly flying by Loki and he's trying to make sense of the situation, all I want is a
yeah.
that'll do me. Or because we know 97's coming and we've seen Paint universes, Noir universes, maybe just a flash of like the 97 universe, the comic X-Men coming straight by us. And just for my sake, throw the 1994 Spider-Man cartoon there as well. Like, really go overboard, lads. You own the rights, use it.
Like there's an AI experiment, right? You get to experience, like, okay, I like that, where the first scene is just Loki experiencing timelines, like kind of similar to what they did in Multiverse of Madness, which is one of the better scenes where Doctor Strange, and we're like, oh my god, this is going to be great. And then they went to a universe where it's like red means stop or red means go, and it's like, oh, pizzas are circular, fuck off. But I that'd be amazing. That'd be incredible. But I'd love like an AI version where you get to pick your own. So you pick your own clips from different things and you experience that as Loki. That'd be class. Interesting. Okay. A lot to process. It feels like something that, as well, if we continue to go on and theorize, we could build up way too much where they couldn't possibly outlive our expectations.
Like I said, the rules are rewritten and they can go anywhere now. They could affect the entire Marvel universe. Like, the Marvel seems like a self-contained story, but what about the post-credit scene? What happens if they're all going out and getting shawarma again as a simple little callback, and then suddenly everything begins to shake and the universe appears to break up again? What if they tie it into events? Now, once again, this is reaching. What if they tie it into events that were happening and allows them to do a little bit of rewriting, like maybe at the end of No Way Home, where the sky was cracking in New York and you see the Spider-Man villains? What happens if, like, maybe that tied into it, and the reason why that spell was so powerful is because this worked? There's a million different ways you can go. I don't think they're going to take the bait on something like that. But because, like I said, we have to remember that if the time does exist normally as the TVA is progressing, we're quite far back in the Marvel Cinematic Universe timeline. So they've done a great job here, whether it was their intent or not, that they can bring this in any way. And any of the mistakes they may have made, they can be corrected. They've put
Yeah.
themselves in a very good situation. And the one thing we maybe need to ask ourselves as well with Victor Timely's death and the supernova loom ending, you know, was this the original plan? You know, or is this now their out? Is this going to allow them to change the story going forward? Like we said before, they've made slight changes to the titles of some of the stuff we know that's coming, and they've kept a lot of projects free. But could we see, as we discussed last week, could the Kang Dynasty fizzle out and become the Doom Dynasty? Secret Wars is safe. You can do a lot with that. But the big problem with the whole John Majors thing and what they seem to be trying to correct is that one title.
Yeah.
But they're in a position now where they could correct all this.
Okay, interesting. And look, I would love, and again, it's not just wishful thinking. This is, I remember us discussing it before, and it's like the perpetual state of a comic book fan is to just live with that hope that it's all just going to click in and make sense. And it never does, but there's always another edition to give yourself hope for. And that's kind of where we're at the moment. But Marvel have done this before. There were times, particularly during phase 2, like I thought, again, it's aged better and I watch it now and enjoy it. But when Ultron was where they left us after Age of Ultron, that story, I'm like, this is dog shite. Like, this is dog shite, and they fucked it. Again, I see it now in a bigger picture and I enjoy Age of Ultron, so it's changed. But like, there have been points, and they've got us back and then got us into phase 3 and the Infinity Saga, and that was incredible. They can snap us back in here, and this is now an opportunity. We're at a fork in the road moment for Marvel, and what I love about this moment is usually when we're at these fork in the road moments, we have to wait fucking months, and we speculate and we talk, and then it does or it doesn't work or whatever. We just have to wait. We're recording this on Saturday morning, 5 days, and we're back. So incredible stuff. Can't wait to discuss it all. Dan, I could talk about this and listen to you theorize and get me excited in a way that I possibly Marvel just like can't live up to the hype. But I could listen to that all day. But we have to wrap it there. We've got a big week next week. It is, of course, the Gen V finale. We're both big fans, so we're going to be discussing that. We're going to be discussing, obviously, what happens next in this. So it's going to be a big comic book episode. Also, as well, for comic book story fans, Invincible starts. Incredible. The Marvels is going to be a week from now, so we're going to discuss our own theories. So, Dan, we have a lot to discuss next week. Always a pleasure to have you on page 180. Thanks for joining us, as always, and we shall chat next week.
We will.